Hey, thanks for tuning in to Caritas Querens and a series of videos about some commonly asked questions about Christian universalism slash apokatastasis. So in this video, I'm going to take a look at the question of, and this is one that comes up a lot too, by the way, is if you believe Christian universalism, you believe that all people are going to go to heaven at some point, doesn't that basically kill evangelism? Like, what's the point in trying to share the faith with others if they're all going to go to heaven anyway, right? And maybe this is part of the reason why I know some people who are very skeptical or kind of put off by universalism will sometimes say that it seems like it's almost sort of syncretistic. It's this idea that it's, people who believe this end up thinking like Christianity is not really that different from other religions, and I'll admit that quite a few of the things I've read amongst Christian universalists oftentimes are more shall we say, ecumenical, more open to seeing some of the good that is in other religions, some of the truth that's in other religions. I don't think that's intrinsically a bad thing. I mean, there are truths in other religions. There are some good elements in other religions. I do think that oftentimes people who are infernalists, I know at least from my own history, when I believed that, my emphasis was much more on Christianity is the only way, and therefore we shouldn't have anything to do with any other religions. Don't even look at the good in them, or the truth in them. It's just like focus on just the good of the one true religion. Anyway, so I do see that sometimes. However, there is a distinction between saying that there's truth and goodness in other religions, and saying that they're all equally good or true. Christian universalism does acknowledge that Jesus Christ is the one true way to the Father, the one true way to heaven. And as a Catholic, I would add that the Catholic Church is the one true church founded by Christ, his mystical body on this earth, his continued presence on this earth, which in a privileged way continues to teach and sanctify and rule us to get us to heaven. So I'm not saying that every other religion is equal or equally valid or anything like that. Certainly it would be easier and better, more efficacious, you could say, for all people, I would argue, if they were Christian, and especially if they were Catholic. Okay? So that's just kind of my disclaimer right from the, right off the bat. I'm not saying all religions are equally good and true, okay? And honestly, I don't know any other Christian universalist I've never come across that would say that, or that I've read them say that or anything like that, okay? Anyway, in answering this question, basically, doesn't universalism basically take away any reason for evangelism and basically quaff anybody's enthusiasm to spread the faith? I'm going to kind of be a little more vulnerable, and I'm going to share a little bit more of my story and my experience in this regard. Not because I think that I'm a great saint or anything like that, but just because I think it's easier for me to explain it from that perspective. I see God's working in this regard much more clearly in my own life. And so for me, it's easier to answer this question by seeing not just some intellectual, speculative answer up here, but to see how God himself has answered this question for me through my own life, if that makes sense. Okay. So anyway, here's what I have to say about that. For a while, I was a staunch infernalist. In fact, I remember that there was a time when, for me, oftentimes, if I wanted to know if a writer or theologian was orthodox, was sound, was really safe, I would look at what they taught about hell. I remember one time meeting somebody, a friend of mine now, who when I early on when I met him, he was a pastor, a Protestant pastor, minister, and we were talking about something, and at one point the idea of hell came up, and I don't remember the context of the conversation, but somehow I mentioned it, and he just questioned. He said something to the effect of, "Well, I'm not really sure that endless hell is a reality," and it turns out, by the way, interestingly enough, that he actually embraces a form of annihilationism. He believes that probably after this life, those who are, not in union with God, that they just cease to be. But at the time, I just thought, well, he must be a universalist, and I just wrote him off and I thought, this guy is a heretic. I don't want to have anything to do with him. And I actually, seriously, literally just kind of avoided him and thought he was a bad Christian. That's where I'm coming from, okay? I was, for about, I guess it was 7.5 years, I taught high school theology at a Catholic diocesan high school. And I was, I think I was pretty well learned. I did a lot of research. If there's something I didn't know, I would research it. I would try to understand it as much as I could, just so that I could really try to teach the faith soundly, clearly, thoroughly, rigorously to my students. But I'll tell you what, one thing that when I look back I find very interesting is I didn't really want to dialogue about these things at all. I would come prepared, and I think part of the reason why I did a lot of research was because I always wanted to come prepared to explain everything as thoroughly as I could so that the kids wouldn't ask any questions. And in the rare occasion that a student actually would ask a question, if I couldn't answer it right then and there, I would say, okay, we'll address it tomorrow. In the meantime, I'd go and research it as much as I could and come prepared to basically answer their question as thoroughly as I could, so there was no ambiguities, no obscurities, so the conversation was done. I didn't want to have any dialogue. I didn't want to debate anything. In fact, I even remember sometimes thinking about when people would have debates about theological topics or religion. I remember thinking it was kind of scary, and thinking I'd never want to have a debate. I'd never want to debate somebody about creation versus evolution, or debate somebody about the existence of God or something like that. Never, even though I knew a lot about it, I could argue a lot about it. And I think in retrospect, I think the thing was that I was scared. I was scared that somebody might find a flaw in my argument. I was scared that somebody might force me up against a wall and I might have to say, I don't know. I was really scared. I was scared of, basically, if I'm going to be brutally honest, I think I was actually scared of the truth. I would not have said that at the time. I thought I was in love with the truth. But which is why I would do all this research and try to present the truth as clearly and systematically and thoroughly and as I possibly could. But really, I was afraid of the truth, because I was afraid that there might be some aspect of the truth that I didn't understand, or that I might have misunderstood, or I might be wrong about, and that I'd come out looking like the loser, and then it would shake me to my foundation, and I would have to wonder, what else am I wrong about? I was scared. So actually, I didn't share the faith with a lot of people. I mean, I did it in my theology classes because I was paid to do that, but outside of that, I didn't share the faith with most people. I'd have conversations with people that were in my small circle of trusted friends, but I didn't evangelize. I didn't debate things with people who had other opinions and varying opinions from me. That's where I'm coming from. Okay. I would never, back in those days, I would never have been doing what I'm doing right now. I would never have been making videos especially about theological topics that are very hotly debated, like Christian universalism. I would never be doing this and publishing them, putting them out there, opening myself up to criticism or to ongoing dialogue with others. I would never have done that. I mean, I didn't ever do it, and I never would have. Never in a million years. Because I was too scared. Now, I love talking about this. And I love, I've reached out to some Catholic theologians to try to enter into conversation and dialogue about this, because I just love it. I'm really rapt. I'm in love. I'm in love with this idea. I'm in love especially with this idea of God, this reality of a God who saves all. I'm in love with it. And you can't stop me. I'll go on YouTube and make these crappy half-baked videos and post them, so that maybe one or two people will see them, because I think it's that important and I love it, So in my mind, I don't see in my own life that this has had a damaging effect on me, that I've shut myself up, and I've been more afraid to evangelize or share the faith or share my ideas about the faith with others or dialogue with others. In fact, just the contrary. I've opened up, and I've actually been willing to do these things since exploring and embracing the possibility of Christian universalism. So, yeah, that's my own personal perspective. Okay. I want to throw this out there too, and so if you look at church history, I know that even even most professed infernalists, I think, will agree that there is documentary evidence, historical testimony, that in the first couple centuries, roughly the first 4 or 5 centuries of the church, that Christian universalism was actually held by a very sizable portion of the Christian population. In fact, it may have been the majority position. And there's some really good evidence for that. If you don't believe me, look it up. St. Augustine, for instance, mentions about, I think it's in the City of God, about people who embrace this, and the word he uses in Latin is that it's like very many, or it could be translated potentially as like the majority, or the most. Most people believe this. He doesn't. He dissents from it, but he admits that it's there. It's widely held opinion. So why am I saying that? I wonder sometimes if that is part of the reason why in the early church Christians seemed so willing to share the faith. Back in those days, you got to remember, it was oftentimes illegal just to be Christian. So just being a Christian was extremely dangerous, was a capital offense. And despite all the odds, Christians not only remained Christian, but they even shared, and the faith was growing. The church was growing in leaps and bounds. I mean, how do you account for that? Now, some people will say, well, different circumstances. Oftentimes when your life is on the line, you take things more seriously. It kind of separates the men from the boys, as they say, or something like that, and people become more mature, more serious about it. Okay, well, I will admit that there probably is a certain element of that there. But I don't think that's enough to account for it. I think that oftentimes when the times get rough, a lot of people do cower, and they do run away, and they do apostatize. So how do you account for the fact that in the early church, so many stayed faithful? And I'll tell you this, again, just looking at my own life, my own personal experience. I mean, if it's so important to have, like an age of martyrdom for people to be serious about their faith, I mean, for me, living in a fairly easy, leisurely type of society, and yet I want to share this, Christian universalism, more than anything else that I've really experienced or studied or come into contact spiritually with in my life, has had such an impact that it's actually woken me up, shaked me, and made me want to get up and share this with others. Not fear that I'm going to, be killed for my faith, not fear that I'm going to go to hell. So I don't know. I think I sometimes wonder if that's maybe one of the highest motives for the early Christians to spread their faith, and for the early church to grow as much as it did, even while the external circumstances were like completely against the church. I don't know. It's just my thought. But suffice to say, you don't have to be threatened to love God. In fact, I would say that, again, in my personal experience, it was this fear of hell that oftentimes had a stranglehold on me spiritually. It was a kind of paralysis of me. I would often be afflicted by scrupulosity, and ultimately, what was it? It was basically worrying, like, well, what if I do this wrong and I end up going to hell? What if I misunderstand this and I do something wrong and I go to hell? It's like, so I oftentimes wouldn't do things. I would always play it safe because I was afraid of going to hell. Christian universalism makes it much easier for me to say, well, okay, I'm not perfect. I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to misunderstand some things sometimes, but I'm going to trust that in the long run, God is all powerful, is all wise, that his wisdom is greater than my foolishness, that his power is greater than my weakness, that his goodness is greater than even my deepest and most adamant evil, and he's going to triumph. And so I don't have to worry. It doesn't give me license to do whatever I want, because to do that is just to completely deny everything I believe. To say, well, since that's the case, I'll just go out and murder a bunch of people. To do that is not to trust in God. It's actually to throw that trust out the window and say, I'm not going to trust in God. I'm going to just do whatever I want instead. I'm going to trust in myself. Well, anyway. But I find it actually very freeing to believe in Christian universalism. Whereas I don't know, for me, belief in infernalism was paralyzing, um, just terribly paralyzing. Um, I think of the story in the gospel, the man who was um, the paralytic, where his friends brought him to the house and it was full, and they let him down through the roof. It's like that poor guy, like he couldn't do anything. He couldn't even bring himself to be healed. He had to rely on the goodness of others. Um, but it's like maybe even there, God is showing us that even a person in a situation like that, who is so paralyzed by fear, maybe by fear of eternal punishment, whatever, a person in a situation like that who is totally paralyzed, that it's not hopeless even for them. That God can save even them. He can overcome their paralysis. If they can't go to Him when He says, "Come to me, you who labor and are heavy burdened," then He will draw them to Himself, as He said. When I'm lifted up, I will draw all men. The Greek actually says drag. I will drag all men to myself. Um, so maybe that in itself is kind of an object lesson of how God will deal with us, even in universalism. Even those who um, are hard-nosed infernalists who believe no, some people are going to get hell for sure. No, even them, God can drag them, can bring them against their paralysis, to come and be healed. So I pray that is the case. I really hope that is the case for myself as well. If I'm wrong, that Christ will drag me to Himself in whatever paralysis I may be or may find myself in life at any point. And I pray, I trust that He will. I trust that He is that kind of God, that not only wants to save all, but really can save all, and so seriously wills it that He will not allow anything that I do or don't do to stand in the way. So, yeah. So what are your thoughts? You enjoy this? Please like, subscribe, share with others. And in the comments, hit the comments, please. Let me know how I'm doing here. Share some of your insights. What questions do you want me to address? And what about maybe some of your experiences? Do you have any experiences being paralyzed by fear of hell? Or maybe not. Maybe you actually find it very freeing and you want to share that. I'd love to dialogue about that. Maybe you have experiences being freed by Christian universalism. If you're willing and to make yourself vulnerable, feel free to share with us. I'd love to hear it and love to carry on the conversation. Until next time, adios.